I've seen this in every industry. I've seen it in healthcare with nurses and others where two people, same exact role, literally the same exact role, being paid tens of thousands of dollars different. Most people aren't cutthroat like they used to be. In a lot of these companies, they see their peers as true teammates and they want to be working together well.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenley, and welcome to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today we've got a great trending topics episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we've got shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space. Other days like today, we cover trending topics, items that recruiters are talking about or will be very soon, and what those mean for them. Stop by every Tuesday for a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that's going to help you drive better results in your day-to-day. Some days we open it up for Q&A. Listeners can drop in questions that they'd like to hear us take on, so send those to us at podcast@loxo.co. And occasionally you'll get a mic drop episode from Matt where he stops by to share something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. All right, today's trending topic. Growing up, I think nearly every one of us can remember our parents saying some form of, it's rude to talk about money, whether it was how much you had, how much you made, or asking others those same questions. It was drilled into us as a very faux pas thing to do. Fast forward to today, and that conversation seems to be changing its tune a little bit though. And so Lex is here to share with us what she's seeing and what she's hearing in the world, and we're going to get a good discussion flowing from it. So with that, let's jump in. Lex, welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be here talking about a
Yes.
very fun and exciting topic, pay transparency. And yeah, kind of pushing back against the societal norms that were pushed upon us when we were children of not talking about pay. I think that, yeah, like you said, this was something that, even 10 years ago at the start of my career, I felt so awkward talking about money, even in an interview setting, asking, how much will this role be paying? What will my salary be? These were conversations that I didn't feel equipped to have, and I felt just uncomfortable talking about and almost rude, even in a setting in which you kind of need to know that information. It almost felt like it was frowned upon. So yeah, today we're going to talk and dive in a little bit into the current landscape of pay transparency and just kind of how the cultural kind of read on this has shifted pretty dramatically in the past 10 and especially in the past 5 years. So I'm excited. I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and you've touched into so many different things that we're talking about or will be covering in this. Like you were scared to bring it up in an interview, like even that we're waiting that long. So you mentioned that this is starting to become up, recently 10 years, but especially in the last 5 years, even more so today. Like, how are you seeing this come up? Are you seeing it just in rumblings in social groups? Are you hearing it in conversations with peers? Like, where is that just starting to come to be a little bit more?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that this is something that you're seeing in a bunch of different places with different attitudes in those different places. On LinkedIn, I feel like, every single day, I can't go a day without seeing a viral post that talks about put salaries in the job description. Hey, employers, put salaries in the job description. I feel like it's inevitable that a post in that vein will go viral at least once a day. So that conversation, I think no one is a stranger to hearing the rumblings of that on LinkedIn, especially, people posting screenshots of job descriptions that don't have a salary listed or have a crazy range that is almost not even worth having because it's like, oh, you could be making $45,000 a year or you could be making $165,000. It's somewhere in there. And I mean, it's laughable how much of a range there is in terms of what people are putting as salary range expectations, and then also kind of, some just not putting anything at all. And so I think that there's a shift happening in terms of what job seekers expect and what they, require almost before applying for a job. We've had so many shifts in the past 5 years as far as like the market being very job seeker friendly or very employer friendly. And those waves happening very quickly and kind of shifting very dramatically, I think has put a little bit more pressure on this in general, because at the end of the day, employees who are applying to jobs, job seekers, they want to know what they're getting themselves into before they start that process. And for employers, there's the conversation around like, okay, well, we want as many possible applicants as possible. I think a lot of times employers don't really know what they want the salary to be. They're waiting for the job seeker or the perfect candidate to tell them. So there's a little bit of that kind of weird game going on. And then you see, just in social groups in general, people being way more open about sharing their salaries, or even just, talking about money with their peers a little bit more than they ever did before. Talking about how much their mortgage payment is, talking about how much they're spending at the grocery store. Social media has definitely changed the kind of acceptability, I think, around talking about money. And we've started to realize it's almost a little bit of a prisoner's dilemma situation. If you don't talk about this, there's stuff that happens behind the scenes that you may not know about. And so having that transparency can help everybody make more. So I think that that's kind of started to happen. And one of my favorite ways that this has happened is there's a social media account. I think it started on TikTok probably. As a non-TikToker, I saw it on Instagram first. So I don't know where it actually started, but it's called Salary Transparency Street. It was created by this girl named Hannah Williams, and she started it after she found out through a conversation with one of her coworkers that she was wildly underpaid. And her mind was blown because she had no idea that she was making way less than her peers. And so that kind of sparked this, just kind of mind-blowing moment for her of, okay, there's probably so many other people out there like me. So now what she does is she goes out into the streets of, various cities throughout the US, and we'll just interview people asking them what they do and how much they make. And it's just this really interesting concept of normalizing the conversation around pay and money in general. She'll talk to them about their living expenses, about, how much schooling they had to go through to be able to get into this role, and what their day-to-day looks like. And it's really, I love watching it. It's like my favorite social media account, even, 2 years later, because so many of these are just shocking, and it shouldn't be shocking anymore. And I think that that's kind of the really interesting part of it. And now they've actually created a database of, I think it's like over 5,000 individually reported salaries. So people can go in there and drop in their role, their salary, and you can kind of explore and compare how much you're making to people across the country, compare based off of cost of living requirements in that city. And it's very fascinating.
Yeah, and that's where it gets wild, because so many of these avenues people weren't even looking to these 3, 5, 10 years ago, especially now. How easy is it to go and ask a stranger, what's your drill? What's your role? How much do you make? Let's post a video and let people share. So yeah, that's one scenario that so many companies may not be thinking about. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking through all of the different ways that I've been hearing about these similar types of conversations that I don't know. I'm sure some are common, some might not be. But as you think from, I'll call it like the macro to the micro level. So you have macro level, like these databases like this, Glassdoor, where people go put in like, here's exactly what I'm making. Here's my title. And it has like the geography of where you're at. And then I've started to see in more personalized ways where it's like you might be in a Slack community, a Facebook community, something like that. And you're like, hey, you're a recruiter in-house. I'm a recruiter in-house. Like, how much do you make? Like, what are your benefits? Anything else? Like, there's those level of conversation where you're comparing role, but, company demographics, where their location, that might not be coming into play as much. Then I've seen it go down another level where it's the same role in the same company. And so this is an interesting one. So like you said, this started with that girl, Hannah, who found out she's being drastically underpaid compared to her peers. I've seen this in every industry. I've seen it in healthcare with nurses and others, where two people, same exact role, literally the same exact role, being paid tens of thousands of dollars different. And so the difference here now is that employees are like, most people aren't cutthroat like they used to be. In a lot of these companies, they see their peers as true teammates, and they want to be working together well, see things fairly. So they'll happily share like, yeah, here's what I'm making. You're not making that. Like, that's an issue. And then they team up against the big company. And like that then comes back to bite you there. So you have scenarios like that where your employees are talking, whether you want to believe it or not. So just assume that that's happening in today's day and age. And then the last one that I've seen that's really interesting is, call it the backfill scenario. So you have a manager, someone who's leaving, and that they're going to recommend, their direct report for that role. I've seen people do this time again. When I had one of my managers left a company in a former role, they said, here's my role and responsibility. Here is what I'm getting paid.
Mhm.
Like, use this to your advantage. So you can't hide this anymore as a company or recruiter. So I say, like, just assume that people know this when you're heading into negotiations before you have it come back and bite you in the butt.
Exactly. I've had multiple situations when I was in the nonprofit world where I would communicate with peers. There's a lot of differences around if you're a salaried or you're an hourly employee. And on paper, it sounds good to be salaried, but in the nonprofit world, a lot of times you're working events and you're working overtime all the time. So there would be multiple situations where someone who had a higher salary would end up actually making less than their peer who was an hourly employee because they're not getting any overtime. And it was a lot harder to justify those late nights and long weekends when you're not getting paid for that, on paper. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of that. And, yeah, again, like you said, peers do discuss things with each other. And especially now that some of the taboo around money has kind of been washed away, I feel like these conversations are happening all the time. I know all of my friends how much they make, how much they work in order to make that much. I feel like that conversation has become much more common too. There are people
Hmm.
who are like, yeah, I'm working like 20 hours a week and I'm getting this and that. And so there's a lot of just transparency happening in social groups. And as that starts to trickle out, you start to feel less uncomfortable talking about this in general. And that's when the conversation starts to happen more in that, okay, with my manager, with my team, having these conversations and comparing notes and starting to kind of move toward, all right, what's fair, what's equitable
Hmm.
here, and how do we push for that? How do we make sure that this happens? And you're, seeing situations where even someone who is well paid, if they're noticing that their peers are not being compensated in their view fairly, that's, a reason for them to, again, start, not really respecting their employer as much and starting to feel a little bit of insecurity about their own role, even if they feel like they're adequately paid right now. So
Hmm.
there is definitely a major impact that just starts to trickle out really quickly here. And again, like you said, employers need to at this point assume that even if they're not legally required to share, salary information transparently, it's going to be something that comes out eventually. And so why not get ahead of it and just be open and honest about that? So again, I think that the bigger problem here is that a lot of times employers just don't know and they're waiting for for the employee to come along and say, this is what I require, and then based on a gut reaction they'll say, no, that's too much, or oh, that sounds good. And so I think
Hmm.
that that's kind of the next phase of this, but having more openness around expectations and ranges, I think, will be helpful in making those determinations moving forward.
Yeah. I know you kind of brazed over it that you aren't legally required to share this
Yeah.
information, but that's also starting to shift a little bit.
Totally. As public interest in this conversation starts to happen, the pressure starts to build, and we're seeing that really ripple out into, the legality of it all and legislating pay transparency. This is something that's happened in many states already and is continuing to happen over the course of 2024. 2 days ago, Washington, D.C. just passed a pay transparency law. And theirs is effective June 30th. Employers with one or more employees must now include the pay scale for a position in any job posting. And they also must provide information regarding healthcare benefits prior to the first interview of a candidate. So doesn't have to be in the job description, but has to come out before the first interview. So that's what Washington, D.C.'s law around pay transparency is now. Again, that passed 2 days ago and is effective end of June. But they range a little bit from state to state, but a lot of them are very similar. Once you hit a certain level or a number of employees, that's when you need to start being transparent in your job descriptions. In 2023, Illinois, New York, Rhode Island, Washington, California, and Hawaii joined the growing list of states that will require this. So it's happening. It's not expected to slow down. This is something where the snowball is already rolling down the hill at this point. And so it's kind of one of those things that dragging your feet about it doesn't really make sense, especially when you're trying to secure the best talent possible. And especially as remote work becomes, maybe not more popular than it was 2 years ago, but it's still definitely such a huge part of the job market at this point. So I don't know. It's one of those things where, okay, legally you might not be required to at this moment in time, but it's coming. And if you're trying to stay competitive on a, national scale, you kind of have to start being a little bit more transparent about this because
Hmm.
it's a bird in the hand or two in the bush type of thing for that job seeker. If I can see how much I'm going to make for this role and it doesn't matter where I live, why would I not apply to this one rather than waste my time with one that's kind of a mystery?
Exactly. And it's starting to become, I'm seeing people game this in a way, and I'm seeing people use it to their advantage because, yeah, okay, I have to post the pay scale. I mean, I think we've all seen the pay scale. It's gone from 20,000 to 250,000.
Yeah.
It's like, when you do that, yes, you're checking the box, but I've talked to a number of candidates, people looking that they see that and they immediately, one, you just lost trust in that candidate because you're just like, okay, they're going through this. Like they're still playing the same old games as before. They're not honoring this in that way. So you're actually hurting yourself more and you're helping yourself there. So if you're going to do something like that, that's where you just, in the job description, instead of putting a $200,000 difference in the job scale, just put, we're looking for someone to help with, in this example, like marketing. It might be a marketing manager. It could be a VP. We don't know what we don't know yet, but we want to find the best candidate for it. So like you could even then break it out and say, pay scale ranges. If you're more manager level, here's what you get. If you're more director level, here's what you'd get. So you can get ahead of some of that with the conversation in a way without being kind of like that skeezy, weird feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is also seeing something that you and I have touched on before, and we were laughing because we pulled up a post where we just saw this in a recent social community, is this isn't something that comes up in the final interview conversation anymore. This is a qualifier if someone even wants to interview for the position or take you seriously. So do you want to read that post that we came across? So
Yeah.
like people this isn't just us saying this.
Okay, yeah, this is from Bill. Bill with no last name. He's like the share of this social group. He doesn't need a last name. He's just Bill. I am the guy doing the hiring. The first thing I'm going to say to you before any questions is this is our pay range. The exact offer and barter back and forth will come in the later stages, but money ranges is the first thing. I've been at companies that wait to talk money until after the second interview or screening, and I have had hopeful candidates laugh at us when we couldn't meet their ask. It is a colossal waste of everyone's time. We thought we had a candidate, they thought they might have a job, and it can delay the entire process for weeks. Bill put it perfectly, honestly. Chef's kiss, Bill. There's really not much more I could add to that. I mean, yeah, why wait until you're at that stage to reveal this information that realistically is critical to the decision and risk having a candidate who's excited about the job otherwise laugh in your face because it's just never going to work.
Mm-mm. And I think that's the difference between hiring someone who's good enough and hiring the best person for the role. Back in the day, it used to be more like, okay, let's get 5 people to a final interview and we'll take whoever is like the best candidate relative to how much we can save or not have to pay them and put that into our margin. Whereas now it's, if you want the best talent, like this is a conversation Matt, myself, others have all the time, is like, if you're truly the best candidate, one, you're going to know exactly what the range is when you do come into the conversation. But two, if you qualify and you check all of our boxes, I'm not going to let you fall through the cracks because of salary. Like we'll figure it out. We'll find a way to make it work, but that shouldn't be a deal breaker like it used to be back in the day. So yeah, from an efficiency standpoint, from a logistical standpoint, it does not make sense anymore.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that it is one of those things too, where we've talked about this in a previous episode around the rise of freelance talent. I think that that's kind of caused this major shift in the conversation too, because as you said before, all of these communities are really starting to become much more popular within the co-working space. And I think that as people have started to compare notes in terms of, okay, how much can I charge for these services? As you start to kind of scale that up, you start to get a better picture of, okay, what could my salary look like if I decided to go full time? How much do I stand to gain by doing this? How much could I make if I didn't? And those conversations and people kind of taking ownership over how much they'll make. This wasn't really something that I feel like employees felt like they had control over 20 years ago. And now I think, because of the state of the economy, because of how much the market has shifted, in our lifetimes, we feel the pressure of, hey, I've got to make sure that I'm strategic about how much I'm making and how I'm making my money, and really starting to take that control back into our own hands as much as we possibly can. And so you see, more and more people having side hustles, starting to make money in these other ways, different revenue streams. And at that point, it does start to shift the control a little bit in that way where it's a little bit more balanced than it used to be. And candidates used to take what they could get. And now I think that if you're a really strong candidate, you've got some bargaining power there and can bring that to the table and say, listen, I want to make this work, but if I can't justify this for myself and my family, like I'm going to go elsewhere and I have other options. And I think that that is the difference that has kind of started to take place in the past couple of years. But yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated situation when you really start to dive into all the factors, but at the end of the day, it's really not that complicated. It's pretty simple. Being transparent, again, like you said, doesn't have to mean throwing a number out there and saying we're sticking to this. It can say, hey, this is what we're thinking, but we're open to discussing based off of your skills, your experience, yada, yada, yada. So it's not that hard, guys.
No. So translating this over to recruiters, why does all this matter?
Yeah, I mean, you started it off kind of for us by talking about getting the right person. Being transparent goes such a long way in terms of, your employer brand in general, what the public perception of you is as a company, but it also helps you attract the right talent. Bill put this perfectly as well. If you bring someone in to the process and are kind of, having this conversation, spending a lot of time mutually, you want to make sure that this person is the right fit in terms of skills, expectations, title, all of that. And so having the opportunity to make sure that that information is very clear right from the jump helps make, one, your outreach more compelling. It increases your chances of actually connecting with the right person, whether this is on an inbound or outbound basis. It just kind of helps you remain competitive with the talent that you really want to attract, and making sure that you're not losing out on those opportunities just because they didn't know. Maybe you would have paid them what they were looking for, but if they don't know, they're going to go and apply and spend their time having conversations with someone where they can get that information from upfront. So that's kind of the biggest piece of the puzzle as I see it, is if you are looking for quality talent that also is, it's checking your boxes and you want to check theirs as well, you've got to be transparent and upfront, not just about pay, about so many other things, but that's a big piece of the equation.
And one thing I've seen companies do really well with this is they will intentionally say, we're going to understand what market rates are for positions and we're going to pay in the top 10% of that. Because what that does is when you have people who are doing that role, but they're finding out like, oh, I could be making $20, $50, $100,000 more at this organization. Like, talk about, you want to attract passive candidates who may not have really been looking. Like, that's another thing that you can do as a recruiter to pull the right people in. Makes it more competitive for them, but you're going to bring in more high quality talent, where if you don't want to go full outbound, if you want to do some inbound, like that's a great variable to play with.
That's a really great tactic just from like a change management perspective too. If you are reaching out to someone who is already in a position, giving them that extra incentive to kind of make the move, and, proving that you're willing to invest in them from the start. I think that goes such a long way in terms of building that trust. Like you said, so much of this does come back to trust. And that is the second big takeaway for recruiters is, we've talked about this, salary discussions, while this is becoming much more common and a little bit less taboo, there still is, especially for millennials and older, that feeling of just, it gives you this weird feeling to talk about money. And it can even be seen as a negative trait, I think, in a candidate sometimes, where they just only care about the money. And like, aren't you excited about this position beyond just the money? Okay, fair-ish. But at the end of the day, we have to understand that employees need jobs so that they can make money to take care of themselves and their families. And so having this idea around the recruiter being the one to open the conversation around pay and not putting the candidate in that position of, feeling like they might be risking some relational equity by bringing this up too soon, or, bringing it up in a way that doesn't make sense. This is something that I think that recruiters can really demonstrate so much respect and care for a candidate, and it can go such a long way in building a long-term relationship if they're just upfront about this information. Candidates don't want to have to be the one to ask the hard questions right away. And so as much as you can alleviate that in the process, that friction will go such a long way. So I think that is just, from a relationship standpoint, being the person who's willing to take the conversation to a place that would be uncomfortable for the other person to initiate, but that you kind of have that bargaining power. I think that is just, one of the best things a recruiter can do if they're given the license to.
Yeah. And when you were talking about, being judged if they care too much about salary, when I think about a recruiter, I think about being a manager. One of the first things I want to know about a person is what motivates them. Because most people, it's going to be, is it pay? Is it the mission? Is it the people they work with? Is it the location they're at? So if they're hyper focusing on pay, I want to know that as a hiring manager, being like, they're probably going to want to know, like, what is the salary trajectory look like for this role? If I meet targets, exceed targets, and everything else, like that is a perfect thing to use for the conversation and to know about who you're hiring. So if any, like, stop painting everything as a negative and find out how to weigh, like, this is actually a great insight about these different people. So if your company is growing, you know that you're going to go from 10 to 100 million in 2 years, like you can afford to pay this person more as time goes on, especially if they're a great candidate. So if they care too much about salary, good. You have their primary motivator covered if your business does well.
Totally. What was that matrix? I think you posted it on LinkedIn the other day. It was pay, purpose, and people.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like, I mean, are you paid well for the role that you do? Do you enjoy the people that you work with? And then your purpose. So it's like, do you enjoy the work that you do, like the role? Do you enjoy the mission that the company does? Do you believe in that? So yeah, it's kind of this like overlapping ikigai concept. So yeah, check all those. But yeah, pay is, believe it or not, that's one of the core parts of it. Because like you said, it's like we have to survive at the end of the day, and that's a huge factor.
Totally. And I think at the end of the day, it's important to remember that that's a big piece of the puzzle that candidates have to know about in the interview process. But speaking to that matrix, there are so many other things that a candidate does value. This is one of the boxes that most people have to be sure is being checked before they move forward, but it doesn't mean it's the only thing that they care about. Most candidates are really excited to spend a lot of time talking about the ins and outs of the role, the higher vision for the company, who they're going to be working with, what their team is going to look like. But in order to get to some of that and those deeper conversations, the surface level needs almost have to be met of, okay, how much, will I be making? And does this compare to what I've been offered at company X or company Y, or what I can expect to make elsewhere? So I think that is one of those things, is just understanding the reality of the situation, which is jobs exist and people need to be paid, and understanding that and using that as a baseline of, hey, this is just kind of bare bones information that has to be provided. Let's get into the good stuff after that's out of the way. That's how I view it, but yeah, we'll see. So the third big takeaway for recruiters here is saving time and resources. Bill touched on this as well, but recruitment is a time-consuming process, and you're getting pulled in so many different directions. Both recruiters and candidates invest a lot of time, emotional energy, just so much into the process as a whole. When you take a step back, in multiple stages, you can invest so much time. So my question, I guess, would be, why spend so much of this precious time on a candidate who you're not really sure is a good fit? They might be a great fit in so many other ways, but if they're not a fit in that area, that can be a big deal breaker for a candidate. So why spend so much time on both sides without knowing, where this is going to go?
Yeah. Or, I mean, it's a great qualifier also at the end of the day. So to move out from the recruiting part for a second, most recruiters, most hiring managers at some point have been in a position where they've been shopping for something for their organization, like whether it's a better tool, they're looking at Loxo, different ATS, any other platform. But the first thing they want to know is, it's like, well, what does it cost? How often do you get frustrated when you go to a website and there's no pricing page, or it's like talk to sales to get the pricing, anything else? Because you want to know, you're not going to lock them into that price, but it's like, are we talking $10, $100, $100,000 so you can self-qualify yourself? Same exact concept here. Like before you start that conversation, I just want to know, like, are we even in the same range for what I'm making or what I want to be making, and use that as a qualifier so you don't have to get into, you could scrap 10 conversations right off the bat because it's way under what they are looking for in their next role. So yeah, just to draw a parallel to ways that other people it might help connect the dots a little bit. That's the first thing that comes to mind there.
Yeah, providing that frame of reference can go such a long way of like, okay, are we even having the same conversation, or do I need to go talk to someone else or refine my expectations and have a better understanding of like, okay, I've had 3 conversations and everyone is shocked by the range that I'm offering. Maybe this is something I need to take to the hiring manager and say, hey, the caliber of talent that you're looking for is just not going to accept this range, or this level as far as salary goes. So I think that those conversations can be super enlightening, and that's great data to take back and to learn from and to evolve with. And so having those conversations earlier before you've invested a ton of time can help you be more strategic moving forward and help you bring that information to the people who, might be having or setting these expectations in the first place. So I think that that's one, a big piece of it. And the other piece is looking at this from a long game mindset and mentality, having these conversations with candidates and like developing that trust. It all goes back to that. You can then, say, okay, maybe this is not the right role for this person. They're just kind of outside of the salary range for this role. Well, I've still developed a really great relationship. I'm going to put them in my database. And when I have a conversation or I have a role that makes sense for this person, I know who to call. And so I think that having that frame of reference again for what this candidate is looking for, what they're expecting, and getting that information sooner helps set you up for not just this job, but the next one that you're looking to place. So having that mentality, I think, can help save you some trouble in the long run and save you the time in the short term as well.
Oh yeah, especially you grow your little book, your CRM, you have that information, and so when you go to start that next job, if you have a CRM where you can search your internal database and you can quickly say, I'm only looking for candidates who are looking to make over this, or pull out those filters. That way you're not sourcing and starting from scratch every single time. You have that information, like leverage it, move faster, and you've already got a much better, higher quality curated talent pool. How many comma/dashes can I add to that preemptive candidate pool there? But yeah, it's being smarter and more effective, like saving time, as you said, right at the beginning of this.
Totally. So we've segued a little bit naturally into the final piece of the puzzle here, which I view as advocacy. I think a lot of times, recruiters are the ones who are having these conversations with candidates. They're getting that qualitative data that is so powerful and can be really helpful in terms of having realistic expectations, creating better job descriptions. It's so important to communicate that information up and out. And so I think part of the reason why this conversation is so important is being able to equip recruiters with the information that they need to make a case to hiring organizations as to why including salary ranges and information in general can be so beneficial, but then also feeling empowered to say, hey, this is not matching up. I want to get you the best candidate possible, but we've got to make some adjustments here if we want that to happen. So I think that that's a big piece of the puzzle. And on that note, recruiters, we would love to hear from you, stories that you've experienced or encountered, red tape that you've run into from hiring organizations when it comes to being transparent around salary, times when you've had conversations with candidates where, you were positioning a certain salary range and that just came out too late, or, was something that helped refine the process early on and you were grateful for it. There's so many different interesting data points that I feel like we could dig into within this conversation. So I'm always curious, and it's an open door. If you have any stories that you want to share with us, we always want to hear them and just kind of gather that for our own sakes. So just had to put that out there.
Yeah, no, it's a great plug. I was talking to a customer just the other day who they share candidate status reports, not only as status report updates for the jobs that they're working, but they use it as a selling prop for getting future business. But one of the core use cases they shared with me was they said, I'll go through, I'll make 20 calls. You said that you wanted to pay $100,000 for this role. Every candidate I've talked to said they wouldn't accept this for less than 140. So I'm going to take this back to you and show I am making the calls, I am doing the work, I am reaching out to the great candidates, but we need to have a chat to figure out what you're looking for versus the market expectations there. So use it as a way to kind of cover your butt, so to speak, as a recruiter. It's not a lack of effort. It's not a lack of targeting the right people. It's level setting on expectations at the very base level, like you said, the table stakes.
Totally. Yeah, I really like that point. And I think that is such a good piece of the puzzle here is, listen, at the end of the day, yes, this is a table stakes matter. And so having these conversations and being able to communicate more transparently up and down the levels will help everyone. And it's one of those things where it's in everyone's best interest to save as much time as possible and to make the recruitment process as efficient as possible, from the candidate to the recruiter to the hiring manager and so on. So if this can be positioned as an area that will help save valuable time and get the right people in the right roles faster, why wouldn't a hiring manager be on board with that? Why wouldn't a hiring organization say, yes, let's do it? So I think it's definitely something that we'll start to, again, see more of, whether it's because of social pressure or it's because of legislation. But I am curious to see how quickly we get to a place of, not seeing in our feeds every day on LinkedIn, employers put the salary in the job description.
There's going to be new posts that need to go viral once that box is checked.
I know.
So,
I'm ready
yeah.
for the next viral movement. I've had enough of that.
Yeah, I'm with you. So this was fun. This was enlightening. I think it's going to empower a lot of recruiters to really think about this and how they approach it with both candidates and the hiring managers that they work with. So thank you for pulling this topic out. This was a fun conversation, and I know those conversations are going to start moving forward from here. So as we wrap, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. If you like this episode, but you're not sure where to go next, we've got a link to a similar episode in the show notes. Those are all in the description of your favorite podcast streaming platform, as well as on our website, loxo.co/podcasts. Do have full video episodes available on YouTube as well as on our website if you do want to see the video version of this. And if you ever have specific questions, looking for advice, want to hear our take on a different trending topic, send those to us, podcast@loxo.co. So, all right, everyone, that was the show. That was an incredible trending topics episode with Lex. Until next time, bye, y'all.